My name is Mark. I'm the CEO of a company called XI. It's a software development and design company in Chicago, where it is snowing right now, which is truly unfortunate. Also the founder of a company called Walkshop, which we'll hear about momentarily. And today we're talking about how to adopt an experimental mindset in an organization. Rather than doing a screen share, I thought it'd be easier if we could actually see each other's faces. So I'm trying to use this behind my face technology instead today. We'll see how that pans out. And I thought actually today, rather than diving right into all of the things I've done at XI, I was going to start with a story about how I got lost in these woods in September of 2017 in the Highlands of Scotland, in the middle of nowhere with about an hour left of sunlight, wondering whether I was going to be able to make it to my destination using the little battery iPhone I had with my little flashlight, trying to navigate these deep, dark woods. I was out with a group of people. We were doing a long distance hike. And as any developer will tell you, estimation is difficult. Apparently, I can't read a map nor estimate distances between towns. And I had not realized how long it would take to get from one place to the next. So I was literally in the woods, almost at dark, with a bit of a flashlight battery on my phone to guide me. And it was one of the best days and best decisions that guided my career going forward. Getting lost in those woods, and it's going to tie back to how we think about the cultural change and how that moment of a little bit of panic actually led to some really great decisions for me at XI. I was there because I had just gotten this opportunity for a pretty big change in my career. I had been in the company for about 5 years at that point. I was the COO, and I had just been given the opportunity to take over the CEO role and really drive the company going forward. And initially, I thought, honestly, how big of a change can this be? One acronym letter change from COO. Like, I've already been on the leadership team. I've been in this company for a while. How different is this going to be in my day-to-day experience? And then I started getting questions that I was not prepared for. As a COO, I was thinking about things like, how do I make next month's numbers, or how do I deliver the quarterly results we're looking for? And now I started getting questions like, well, if you're going to be the CEO, where do we want to be 10 years from now? And while I was very focused on how we were doing work and what we were doing, I started getting questions as, well, if you're going to be the CEO, why are we even doing it? What's our purpose anyway? What's the reason for this company to exist? Things that candidly I wasn't really thinking about. I was so focused on what we were doing, taking that step back to think about, well, what kind of a culture do we want? And how do we think about the long-term future? Those were not things that were immediately on my radar. And so before I stepped forward into this role, I decided to take this really big step back. I like to process information by getting away, frankly, from Zoom and technology. And so I was like, I'm going to go for this long hike. And I wanted to learn from some of the best people in the business. So I invited 9 other people who I really respected in the industry to come with me. And so these are other CEOs, leaders in the technology space, 5 men, 5 women, all said yes and went to Scotland with me to go for a long walk, basically in the middle of nowhere in the woods. We found a course that would take us from town to town, each town only about an 8 hours walk from the one before. And we found a service that would carry our bags. So we'd have the kind of metaphorical weight of the world on our shoulders, but that's it. You go for a long hike and you end up at a bed and breakfast, and all your bags were delivered for you so you could get up and do it again the next day. And because I'm creative like that, I decided to call it a walk shop rather than a workshop. So we're going to literally walk and talk across Scotland. And some days the trail looked like you're going back and forth and trying to read the signposts and figure out where you're going to be. And some days you'd be in the deep, dark woods where the trail is very narrow. And so you're really left to your own thoughts as you're thinking through things. And sometimes you'd be going through a beautiful field of heather and the trail widens up and you can have more group conversations. But it allowed me to start thinking about the nature of this role and what I should be doing in my first 100 days. And I remember thinking at the time I was going to learn a lot about, how do I balance sales and marketing, or what's the first thing I should be doing to improving our go-to market. And that's not what we talked about at all. We talked a lot about how do you handle the stress of this job? How do you handle your philanthropic responsibilities if you're on a board with the actual responsibilities you have in the company? And we talked a lot about how do you want to shape the culture of your business. Stuff that was really valuable to have that dedicated time with some really dedicated leaders to talk about. Stuff that you don't really think about when you've got 10 minutes in between meetings. So this group managed to go to Scotland with me. We survived the trip, although I'll say it was pretty sad. Out of 10 people, only 3% made the entire hike. So 70% of us broke down and hitchhiked somewhere in the middle of the woods because walking was so hard. We're used to sitting down all the time. How sad is that? We didn't even have a bag. We were just walking. But because we're so used to sitting in our industry, the idea of walking for 5 straight days was exhausting, and most of us had to break down and hitchhike at one point. But when we came back, we were all posting photos and talking about on LinkedIn, like how valuable this was to step away from the grind, to get away from technology. All of us run technology businesses, and to have a truly analog experience out in nature where you didn't have Twitter or Slack or notifications pinging you. You actually had time to think. So we posted all these photos and said, this was an amazing experience. And I was like, I think I'm really ready for this job now. And when everyone saw the photos, they would ask me questions like, well, when's the next Walkshop? When's the next one coming? And I had to say, well, there's no next one. Like, I've got a whole business to run now. I'm taking this new job. But everyone was really kind of encouraged with this idea of stepping away. So we said, all right, well, what if we made this a thing? So we said, all right, we're going to do it again next year. And here's the approach we're going to take. So again, 5-day hike. And the next year we decided to go through the Black Forest of Germany. And we said, here's an overall approach we might take. So day one, you're going to get there, you're going to be jet lagged, and you're going to unpack. Not just actually, but metaphorically, you're going to unpack some thoughts around why are you doing this? Why are you stepping away from your organization and from your business to think about what you want to be doing? On day two, you're going to unplug. It's a rare gift that we give each other. If you think about how, especially now, how often we are on camera, on technology, on Zoom, on Twitter, on Slack. And so to purposely be like 5 days, nope, I'm just going to give my space time to think. And by day two, you really notice what it was to unplug and forest bathe, or just be out and not have be tied to technology and tied to the next meeting. On day three, we started uncovering things about each other, unique strengths that we have, things we think that we are capable of investing more in and growing in ourselves. So you really start thinking about what are the things I'm uniquely good in. And by day four, you start talking about what are the things that are holding me back? What are the things that are maybe habits I've developed or patterns of working that maybe used to work for me but aren't serving me well anymore? And so how do you unlearn old habits and make way for new opportunities and new ways of thinking? And by day five, you had so many ideas, you started thinking about, well, how do I unlock all this when I get back? Just filled with energy and enthusiasm for what you can be doing when you get back to the grind. So we had a group, 18 people went to Germany that year, a mix of storytellers, authors, thought leaders, CEOs, designers, who wanted to try this experience of getting away from technology and stretching their legs, getting out in the open. And I will tell you, the Black Forest is very aptly named. It gets very dark in there, these tall, super tall trees where the canopy blocks pretty much all the sunlight. And then you end up in these delightful little towns. After that, we said, well, try one more. The next year, we went through Tuscany, and we had another 18 people walk through the Italian countryside and had just incredibly engaging conversations, thinking about where they want to go in their career and where they might want to go next. The food was amazing, the conversation even better, and it provided so much value to everyone going. They started really thinking about how they typically show up. When they're thinking about driving their own company cultures, as they think about how they're investing in their own company cultures, how much of your time is sandwiched in between meetings or sending out emails? Do you generally give yourself the time and space to think? So this is one of the first things I wanted to lead with. When you're thinking about how do I make my company more experimental? How do I get in that right space? How do I invest time in my culture? It starts with you, and it starts with getting in the right mindset. There's a funny saying that busy is the new stupid. There's a great interview that was between Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, and they were talking about two fabulously wealthy, very successful people, and the interviewer was asking, what's your week like? What do you do? And Bill Gates, showed his planner, and it was all these meetings. I've got my fingers in all these different parts of my business. I got one-on-ones. I'm investing in people. I'm doing all these things. And Warren Buffett showed his calendar. He's like, I got one thing on Tuesday. That's it. The rest of the time was to read, to think, to strategize. And he looked at Bill Gates and he's like, you're doing it wrong. Like, there's this chronic sensation in our, especially in the US, that being busy is good, that being busy derives value, and that thinking and giving yourself that time to think isn't considered as valuable. You got to be busy doing stuff. And so we cram our calendars full of meetings and we try to get all of these emails and things done. And we don't block time to think, as seen as a valuable pursuit of time. And I actually really agree with Warren Buffett on this one. I think busy is the new stupid. I think when you really sandwich yourself between meetings and you give yourself a 20-minute gap to quick get some water and food and then get to your next Zoom call, you're not going to be strategic about your business, and you're certainly not going to be thinking about where your company can be going 10 years from now. And so to really have an experimental culture, you got to put yourself in the mindset where you're open to new ideas and you can think about creatively different possibilities, things you can't do when you're sandwiched between Zoom calls. So as a pro tip, there is a tool I'd recommend. This is my first practical tool. Look up a thing called Clockwise. It's a tool you can have either for you personally, or you can run it up for the whole company. And it looks for ways to optimize your calendar so you don't create that, that gap of 20 minutes in between sessions. It'll help you rearrange things. It'll help you protect blocks of time. It'll help you say, like, at least twice a week, I want a 3-hour block of time where no one can bug me. It'll help proactively get that into your calendar. Highly recommend. So the next thing I was thinking about is like, all right, well, if I'm in the right mindset and I've been able to create space in my calendar, how do I show up as a CEO? When I engage in conversation, when I engage in meetings, when I do have them, how do I show up? And one of the best pieces of advice I got in that second Walkshop was that you need to shut up. No offense to other CEOs out there, but oftentimes I think people assume that the job of a leader is to be this clairvoyant visionary who knows where we're going to be going and has some strategy for everything. And more often than not, that's never the case. Your job is to be able to ask really good questions and make tough decisions, but you're not some all-seeing oracle. You're not supposed to know everything. And so when you go into a meeting, the first thing you should write down as an acronym is the word WAIT, which stands for why am I talking? And so when a debate comes up or something comes up, you want to be able to ask questions to the team and make sure other people's ideas are being heard. On the walk, as we were talking about this and thinking about, well, how do I show up in meetings? We started thinking about some of the other classic anti-patterns that will come up. And now that you've heard me talk about this a couple of times, I get so excited thinking about like how do individuals show up in sessions. But we started thinking about, well, what are the common anti-patterns that prevent good ideas from happening, from good experiments being acknowledged or adopted? And so imagine you are a junior developer on a team and you're working with the CTO, and the CTO says something that you don't agree with. It's very easy with a power dynamic like that just to smile and nod and be like, all right, yep, sure, we'll do that idea. And you really want someone to be able to challenge and to question. But that's hard to do. It's also very hard sometimes when you're the leader and you've been building, let's say, a piece of software for a long time, you know where all the constraints are and someone else offers an idea. It's very tempting to say, yeah, that's not going to work and here's why. And so what we've tried is to create established roles where we would give the devil's advocate role to, let's say, a more junior team member in a meeting, and they can blame it on the game and say, listen, today I'm just playing devil's advocate, but here's why your idea is not going to work and I want to try something else. It gives them free reign to challenge someone who maybe has more experience or more authority and say, here's where the idea might not work. Similarly, you can give the angel's advocate card, for example, to someone in a position of power. And someone who's typically going to be saying, here's why your idea could not work. And force, just say, for the next half hour, you have to yes and everything and say why ideas might work, even though you know there are constraints that people might not. How do you invest in someone's idea and see if you can build on it before you automatically just shoot it down? So we started thinking about lots of interesting ways people could show up in meetings to make sure that they were behaving in a way that all the ideas were being heard and the good ideas were being heard, not just the executive ones. That led to, when we were on the Germany hike, lots of interesting brainstorming around what are the other ways that people show up to prevent good ideas and good experiments from being identified. There are a bunch of individual things that people can do. I'll make this a bit bigger. So there are ways that people were communicating, like people were interrupting each other, people were having side conversations we were calling out. One of my favorite behind my head over here is going down a rabbit hole. So when you have so much detail, you're getting really lost in the weeds, and now your team has no idea what you're talking about, and you've lost your audience. There are ways that people were showing up that prevented really good understanding and connection. So we started thinking about, well, what are ways we can call those kinds of things out? Now, with pandemic and people being in quarantine, it's hard to actually have a physical card game. This actually turned into a physical card game that we designed on that hike and came back and decided to put it up on Kickstarter to see if anyone else would be willing to challenge their company culture to be more inclusive and think about different ways of running meetings. And it closed like that. I was amazed. So we went from being a software company to also being a company that makes a card game. And now there's about 100 other companies that are running this process to challenge how they think and how they act in meetings to make sure good ideas can be heard. With that, we actually made a bunch of Zoom backgrounds so that when people are in a digital setting and they want to say, hey, for today, I'm going to be devil's advocate, and they can show up in a session and show kind of where their mind space is at. I think my favorite is actually this one that came from the Zappos team, where you're the meeting toddler. I don't know if you can see that. I'll get out of the way. And so as a meeting toddler, you can say, yeah, I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, Natalie, exactly. Explain it to me like I'm 5. And you might know what they're saying, but you're asking a question you think other people are afraid to ask because that's the role you're in that meeting. And you're going to ask the thing that makes everyone be like, okay, what does that acronym really mean again? And as a toddler, you have carte blanche to ask whatever you want. That's kind of your job in that meeting. So it's been a fun way to think about how people can show up differently and start thinking about inclusive conversations. And so if you want, there's a place you can download those backgrounds or play that card game as a way to make sure that your company's in that right space. So pro tip number 2, intentionally include people in conversation so the good ideas are being heard, not just the executive ones. Find ways to call out patterns where people aren't inclusive or people are feeling steamrolled or ignored or interrupted. And see if you can make a more inclusive company culture. Part 3. One of my favorite events in Chicago is an event called Chicago Ideas Week. We've been partners with them for a long time and have had these really fun opportunities to have a big stage and talk about innovations and talk about changes in the industry. People that are advancing healthcare and medicine with technology and education in the arts. It's been really fun to talk about all the big things that we're doing. But whenever you participate in some kind of innovation conference, while it's inspiring, it's also a little intimidating when you see people talking about these amazing new books they've written and amazing new initiatives they've created. And so we actually thought during Chicago Ideas Week, the main thing we really want to drive is not talking about all the good ideas that people have had, but what are the really bad ideas? So where did your career really get tripped up? What failures have you really learned from? And so during Chicago Ideas Week, Table XI has been hosting Biggest Mistake Night as a way to highlight some of the biggest train wrecks and mistakes people have made either on projects or in their careers that help them really to learn and advance. This is one of my favorite nights when we really get to know people, and the speakers seem a lot less intimidating. They're like, you can hear about these horrible mistakes they've made and then what they did to rebound from them. We've been trying to take that as part of the learnings from this event and make that part of our company culture. So at Table XI, we actually have this poster hanging up. I'll make it a bit bigger, where you can see all of the different speaker notes. I'll get out of the way. And you can see things like, sometimes you need to fail. Innovation doesn't happen without failure. The key thing is to find others to make mistakes with. These are leaders and speakers talking about the value that failure has had in their organization. We actually have this hanging on the wall because it meant so much to me that when I became a CEO, I started a pattern where I would talk about every time we get together at all hands, I'd say, these are the 3 biggest mistakes I've made since the last time we got together. Figuring if I can own up to my mistakes, and my mistakes are probably going to cost us more money than anybody else's, it'll be easier for people to be willing to try something, knowing that there's not this fear of retribution. There'd be an opportunity for them to have a go at something. And it might be a mistake, it might fail, but that's okay to try something in the pursuit of something new. And when Inc. magazine was interviewing our company and talking about with each employee, what's unique about the company? Why are you trying to get this award? One of the things that frequently came up was the ability to celebrate and recognize mistakes, even the CEO getting up and saying, here are the things I've screwed up. And it was great. That was one of the best recognitions we got pre-pandemic, was this award talking about how our company has been recognized as a leader in the space because of the fact that we have this culture talking about innovation. That meant a lot. So the thing I would say is find a way to really recognize and celebrate failure as a way as part of your practice. One of the things that just happened last week in our company was a developer created a Slack channel for us just about this. You can celebrate like minor little failures and be like, oh, this totally didn't work. This is what I learned from it, and not make it a thing everyone's afraid of. Just make it a thing that people think, oh man, I've done that too. And it allows people to recognize failure for what it is, the opportunity to learn. This is a good acronym to think about. To fail is really a first attempt in learning, and view it in that mindset. One of the most powerful words as a parent, and what I'm also seeing at work, is the word yet. And so if you're giving someone feedback, it's not that you did something wrong, you can't do it. It's you can't do it yet. You have an opportunity to learn that and build that skill. And so I think the word yet is a very powerful word that can be used in an organization, talking about capabilities you may not have yet, or in feedback with an individual about skills they may not have yet, but yet implies the ability to grow. And I think it's a very important word to stress when you're talking about failures and recognizing things haven't gone the way you'd want it to with an experiment. It allows you to think about what you can do differently next time. And so I think there's a reframe when you think about mistakes and thinking about failures, to see it as a learning opportunity, as a learning moment, and celebrate it for what it is. The next thought I wanted to introduce, and then we'll go to questions in just a second, but this is an interesting way of thinking about experimentation on its own terms. So if you have a culture where you're giving yourself time to think, and you are able to hear ideas and hear suggestions, and even building a culture where failure is not just tolerated, but accepted and encouraged sometimes, you have this ability to build a culture of like having a go, being willing to try something. And so now what happens if you're trying quite a lot of things? How do you actually keep track of all those things? And so this is a process we've tried where we build a radar. Make this a bit bigger. So each radar here, let me actually zoom in a bit. I'm going to hide myself for the purposes of this. So in my radar, I can zoom into any different quadrant of the things happening, experiments at our company. So I'm going to zoom in on, like, let's say this quadrant. And within that quadrant, I can see there are things that are in the rolling out stage, things that are in the experiment stage, things that are in the assessment stage, or things that are on hold. An on hold item might be something we're not quite ready for. And we have this common vocabulary throughout the company of, if something's an assessment, you're not quite ready to try it as an experiment yet, but you want to learn about it. You're going to ask other companies what they're doing. You're going to do some reading and some research. If you're doing an experiment, you're not rolling out something for the entire company. You're going to have a go and try this and see if it works, maybe with a small group of people. And then if it works really well, then you can get to the place where you're rolling it out, actually having it, adopted by the whole company. Now, the radar like this, you can drill down on each one and see more about what's happening, or you can go to another area entirely and say, show me a different part of the grid. So you're able to zoom around and check out different parts of experiments your company is driving to get a sense of what investments you might be willing to try. So I like this as a concept that allows you to map out some of the ideas that could be most appealing in your organization for change, and giving people a framework by which to explore these. For us, the framework was, we have 4 different areas of our business that we're experimenting in, and there are 4 different stages of on hold, assess, experiment, and roll out. And then we can plot the various experiments so people kind of know what we're doing and where. I think that kind of framework for experimentation gives everyone a common ground to know what's going on and a place to check and see what's being driven. Once you have that, one of the things I really get excited about is a forum for discussion. At Table XI, it looks like this. We have a big experiments breakfast we do. Once a quarter, we pull up that radar and talk about the experiments we're driving. Back before quarantine, we'd actually literally get breakfast together and all hang out and talk about it. Now we do it through Zoom. But we're talking about what are the things that we're doing. And we create a forum by which we can have conversation around things, new experiments that might be tried, experiments that failed and are now on hold, or experiments that went really well that we're rolling out. And so there's a regular opportunity to get together and talk about the things that we're going to have a go at. A big part of having an experimentation-based culture is the willingness to put a spotlight on something, talk about how you're measuring it and what impacts will be, and then whether it's failure and we're going to kill it, or a good idea and we're going to roll it out. And so we have at least a quarterly opportunity as a business to get together and talk about what are the things we're going to have a go at. I think the thing that I've tried most differently during pandemic is not how I'm communicating, however, but how I'm listening. And this has been a big lesson learned for me, even in the last 2 months. I've tried something very different. And so my last note before we go to Q&A is to think about, how do you go from building a forum for discussion to have a better opportunity to listen? This is what I thought we should be talking about. And so every quarter we have something called an Ask Me Anything. And I ask people, what should we be talking about at next week's Ask Me Anything? And since I can't get together and have a one-on-one, I did what probably most of all of us would do, was send out a survey. What's on top of mind? What should we talk about? And of course, as you probably could have guessed, the number one thing, if you can see this, was office space. What are we doing with our office space? When do we go back to our office space? Are we going to get a new office space? That was the number one thing by far that people had mentioned. And so you assume, since it was mentioned the most, it's the most important thing. But that's a poor way of listening. That's taking a survey, because when I send a survey, I'm the only one who gets to see what everyone said. Instead, I wanted to find a more inclusive way to do something like this. So we tried a new tool, something called a thought exchange, where after you answered the question, then you got to anonymously see what everybody else said, and you could rate their answers 1 through 5 and say like, oh, wow, I didn't think about that idea, but that's a really good question. That's what we should be talking about. I'm going to give that a 5-star. This other one, no, more like a 3-star. It doesn't matter as much to me. And everyone started interacting on each other's ideas, as opposed to just me, the person who sent the survey, seeing everything. And look what happens when you have that opportunity to really see what people thought of each other's ideas and vote on each other's ideas. It blew me away. So here is, if I zoom out of the way, this is what it looks like when I say, show me the most popular ideas. And as you say, office space is by far the biggest one. What are we doing with office space? Down here towards the bottom, second to last, mental health and burnout. Not very frequently mentioned. And so if I look at this in a survey, only about 1 or 2 brave people were like, I'm going through some stuff right now, and anxiety, mental health is a problem, and I really wish we had a space to talk about it. But look what happens when I change the axis and say, don't show me the things that were mentioned the most. Show me the things that were voted the highest. What got the most engagement? Now office space is third from the bottom. Mental health and anxiety, second from the top. And the highest voted one was this one. I'm worried and I fear for mental health and burnout. Can we please talk about this? Finding a different way to listen and really engage an audience and know what's top of mind totally changed. And the way I used to do this pre-pandemic was I'd have conversations. I'd be in person. I could talk about that. But as soon as we went to quarantine, the best I had, I thought, was a survey to figure out what was going on. And a big part about having a successful experimental-based culture is being able to effectively listen. This is a kind of a visualization of what happened when we did that. So you can see early on, people are submitting ideas. You see little people icons and little idea icons. And I can see one idea is getting a few people voting. And there's a whole bunch of people around the outside that haven't done anything yet. They're just kind of reading. But over time, more and more people start engaging on each other's ideas, and they upvote some ideas, they downvote some ideas. And by the end, there's no people on the outside who haven't engaged. And more people are saying, I like this one, I don't like that one. This took 6 minutes. It wasn't like we were doing this for, we didn't have to compile results from a very complicated survey and analyze them. 6 minutes later, I could see that mental health and anxiety was the most important thing to talk about, not office space. That could have been solved with an email. The discussion we should have been having was around mental health. And so as we think about how do you really bake in a truly experimental-based culture, how do you learn about what's going on? You need to find ways to perform active listening. And sometimes that means sending a survey, and sometimes that means finding other ways to listen and know what's going on. And thinking about a different way of engaging an audience. Even though you can't be there in person, still find a way to know what's happening and get that kind of engagement. So these are I said, we're going to try and get real practical things people can take away from. Here are my practical recommendations. I think get in the right mindset. Whether you can go on a Walkshop or not, I would love it if you came with me sometime, but just, I don't know, get away from Zoom, do a walking one-on-one, try to go back to 1990s technology and get away from camera and go for a stroll together. Different ideas will happen when you dedicate that time to walk, and you don't just do it as like a 1-minute thing in between meetings. 2, if you're curious about trying to make your meetings more inclusive, you can go to meetingsdoneright.co and learn more about the card game that we have, or just think about, there's a podcast we had on that channel of all the best meetings and the worst meetings and the things you have to think about when you're actually trying to shape culture by having meetings as a primary way that people interact. If you're curious about that radar was shamelessly stolen and borrowed from a company called ThoughtWorks. They've got an amazing radar they publish, and they actually have an open source tool, which is what I use to create a radar for my own company for the experiments that we're creating. And last but not least, if you're curious about that other way of listening, that's a tool I adopted literally just a few weeks ago called Thought Exchange, which allows me to not only get a poll out there, but to interact on other people's ideas. So hopefully that's a few just very practical suggestions that people can leverage and kind of bake into their company culture and think about how in their work that they're doing, how can they be adopting that kind of experimental mindset.